Good afternoon. I'm Itai Madamombe, and this is Siva Kumari, and we're going to spend lunch with you. So earlier today, I learned a really important lesson. You know how they always tell you to send your picture to conferences, and I never send my picture. I just don't see the point. And so they kept telling me, send your picture for this conference, which I didn't do. And we met earlier, and I didn't know how she was going to identify me. And so as I was sitting in the corridor trying to figure out how we would identify each other, she comes right up and taps me on the shoulder and says, hey, there you are. And I said, oh, how did you know who I was? And she said, well, you know, they've got your picture. And I said, really? Because I didn't send a picture. She said, well, they do. There you are. And I look at this picture, and there I am with a glass of wine. Out of all the pictures that they could find on the internet, this is the one.
I thought I was in good company.
And then she taught me an important lesson. So she said, what did you say? Tell them.
Well, I said, it's always good to have a glass of wine at dinners, but always keep it behind your back when you get a picture.
So there you are, and send in your picture. At least you get the picture that you want. So Siva and I are very passionate about the role of education in creating global citizens. And I think traditionally, the school system aims to prepare students for exams. So you take an exam, you pass, you move on to the next level until you graduate into the job market. And now we sense a shift in consciousness where people understand that education can play a more fundamental role. I think there's a real shift towards using education to create global citizens who care about the world, who care about the people that they share this world with. And Siva, you've spent a lot of time thinking about all of these issues. You are the Director General of IB, and before that, you were an educator for many, many years. And my first question to you is, what is the purpose of a good education in the 21st century?
Okay. First, can I ask how many of you are from an IB school? Oh, great. It's always great to have an IB contingent. And can I ask how many of you are educators in general, whether in IB schools or not? Okay, great. So to clarify a bit about my perspective, I come from a higher education world where I was in one of the universities in the US, and then I've transitioned to the IB, which is obviously clearly about the kindergarten through 12th grade spectrum. So I'm kind of a boundary spanner, so my perspective is informed by both of those experiences. I think to answer your question, Itai, it's important to think of what is schooling, right? And I don't mean schooling as someone who's gone through school, but what is the purpose of education at that level? So what is a schooled individual? The IB has a unique perspective on that. We believe it is creating a human being that is going to think about the world in everything they do and is capable of creating change in the world. And that sounds soft and woolly, but we're also about a rigorous curriculum and rigorous assessment at the end of what we call the diploma program, which is the pre-university level. And I think why that is important is you have to have both of those in education, because you can't have soft objectives, kind of like the ones we have, without proving that you can do that by creating a human being who is capable of thinking about their world and the world around them. And I think you asked me what is important in education now. And I think ever more than when the IB was created, because it was created post the World War to create human beings who understand each other and think of how to create dialogue and peace in the world, which we would all agree, even today, is very, very important, because the amount of damage done otherwise is irreparable in some cases and takes a lot of effort. So one of the things we are clear about is how do you create this individual who is a rigorous thinker, so really thinks about how they learn about the world around them, how to create knowledge, and then is subject to rigorous assessment that we do from all around the world. So our curricula is created with teachers from all around the world, and our assessments are assessed by all around the world. Just to spend a little bit of time about what that means today, what does education mean today? I think before now, most of you will agree that while we had theories about education or we had practice in education, it was only available to a few individuals around the world. You can rewind the button back to wherever you want to, and you know that access to education was limited to a select few. I think what's exciting about the IB, but also the dialogue that's been happening so far this morning, is how do we create access to education to many, many, many more individuals, which is a quality education that gives them a space in the economy of their country, but also a voice in the larger geopolitical sphere.
Siva, so what separates IB philosophy when it comes to education to the standard school is this emphasis on developing a complete human being who cares about other people. So compassion, tolerance, these are some of the things that you emphasize. And these are soft competencies. We are in a system that cares about measurement. So how do you measure such things as compassion? Do you give an A? Do you give a B? And if we can't measure it, how do we know that this stuff works?
So I think we very much start off with our assessments about the hard stuff, right? So the content and the rigor, the thinking of the student. We're not just focused on the content acquisition because that's a short-term goal, really. And increasingly in a world where information is at your fingertips, that becomes even a much shorter-term goal. So we're interested in how is this individual thinking. So our assessments are designed, and I hope that many more are designed this way, is to focus on what is it we're measuring and what is the backwash effect that it has in classrooms. Because I think all of you know the dialogue about education, what you measure gets taught, and therefore be very careful about what you create. So we're not interested in the short, multiple choice questions and things like that. What we create is very careful. We spend a lot of time thinking about if we design this is what will happen in the classrooms. So we kind of almost backward map the exam to have the kind of desired outcome we want in schools. The second thing, to answer your question about the soft, and I'll come back to it because the soft is not the soft anymore, is we focus on the teaching profession a lot. So when we create a school, it's not that we just say, okay, here are our courses, just go do it. We spend a heck of a lot of time working with that school to ensure that it accepts this philosophy. I.e., is the head of the school bought in? Do they have the resources and the ability to sustain these programs in the school? Are they committed to the teacher as a professional who needs to learn all the time? And that's partly where we won't let go. We expect that teacher to be working with other teachers, to be thinking internationally, and to be a continuous learner themselves. So that's another tenet of ours. And then coming to the hard stuff versus, we are benchmarked internationally. We spend a lot of time with Ofqual, which is in the UK, to ensure that our assessments are assessing the right thing that universities want. I myself was, a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting with the Royal Society of Sciences thinking about what they want to see in science and math. So we dialogue a lot with people to ensure that our curricula and assessments are benchmarked around the world, and we're accepted around the world. So these students are accepted internationally, whether it's in Australia, US, UK, Canada, or many, many other places now, including Japan. So what we spend a lot of time is on that, but we put a lot of belief on the teacher. And I think the culture of teaching in the school can enable what you call a lot of the soft skills. But at this point, what I was at we were in Stanford talking to the university admissions officers there and the president and all of that, is one of the things that they mentioned is now they're getting a lot of students from around the world that are IB students. And they're also getting, clearly we have, the advanced placement, CIE, all of which do a very good job of assessing. It's a different kind of assessment, but they do a good job of that. So what the dean of admissions there was saying is, they are very interested in the individual as a learner at this point. So we have what is called a learner profile. So we focus on what is needed in the learner: resilience, global mindedness, caring about others, all of these kind of things, intellectual capability to think differently. So he said it would be a really good idea if you kind of started thinking about how you give us additional information. Because we get so many students now, and we are very interested in this additional profile of the students. So we are spending, it's in our strategy for this year, we're spending a lot of time thinking about how do you do that without messing things up, right? So the minute you start measuring, because you said, do you give an A for caring? I hope not, But how do you measure measure those kind of things that are harder to measure, but give some sort of either qualitative or quantitative record to the universities to show what kind of student they're getting.
Thank you very much. So when I went to school, we were 40, sometimes up to 60 students in one class with very little resources. And if I caught a glimpse of my teacher on any given day, I was really happy about that. Mm-hmm. And so it makes me wonder, in a context where teachers are just trying to get through the day and ensure that their students have the right numeracy, literacy skills and vocational skills that they need to transition in life, is education for global citizenship a high-class problem? Or can we truly make this stuff global? And
yeah.
What do you say to a teacher in Kibera?
Yeah. I would argue actually that I don't know what we mean by high class, but if you're talking socioeconomic status, because you could have a lot of money and have very little class. So, I think if you're talking about socioeconomics, I would argue that the inverse correlation is truer. I.e., if you're coming from, you happen to be born into a lower socioeconomic status, it is more important for you to have those generated, because we know often people of wealth have the ability to migrate globally and are thinking of what happens when they go to the different parts of the world. But I think the reverse is much more true, to really understand what is going on in the world. I think because a student getting educated in the US in about 5-10 years, it doesn't matter whether they got educated in the US, they'll probably find a job that is global. And the reverse is true. You know there's global migration. I mean, we don't have to argue about that anymore. That the trends are that students go elsewhere for a job. We know from the McKinsey reports that there's going to be 7-8 jobs in the student's lifetime. It's quite unlikely that they'll be in the same GPS that they were born in, or the same GPS, geographic position system, the same GPS when they go for the first job. It's quite likely that they'll be migrating around the world. Whether or not they migrate, it's quite unlikely that they'll be working with people just from their locality. So
I recognize the importance and the need for this kind of skill for people, especially in poorer circumstances, as you've said. But my question is that if you're a teacher without resources and you're dealing with a number of students and already struggling to teach them the basic things, does the additional work really, in a sense, right, compared to where we are?
I did miss that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's additional. I think, I was quite inspired by the teacher from Afghanistan and the one from Haiti who was speaking, and how they were using, the local plastics, or, how he made it a point to not take a cent and create sustainable environments. I think what we try to do is, teach in a way that the student is thinking of that problem. First of all, attempt real world problems like they were, right? So why do you care about global change, right? Like why do you care about climate change, for instance? And you can situate that problem in your locality, which is important as well for it to be real, but ask them to think more broadly. So I do agree that a teacher from say a lower socioeconomic status would probably have to think differently about how to accomplish that objective. Whereas it might, one could argue, it could be easier for someone with lots of resources. But I don't subscribe to the notion that it can't be done. I'll give you an example. We are, clearly we are in some of the best schools in the world. We're fortunate to have that footprint. It's what we started off with. But we are now working in places like Ecuador, where President Correa, is determined to have as many schools as possible, and they're not looking for, like getting 45, which is our highest mark in the IB. He says, he wants every student to get this rigorous education because it's very, very important for their system. I mean, those teachers are teaching with limited resources, and we provide a great deal of scaffolding, which is what is needed. So a lot more help, a lot more professional development to get them to that point. On the other hand, we're also working in Chicago in the public schools. And Rahm Emanuel, who is the mayor there, and some of you know him from his Clinton era days, is very passionate about our education, and he wants IB schools. And again, in those schools, too, we want to encourage this kind of thinking. So I would say it's a pedagogical shift. It is not easy to make, but it's not impossible.
I agree with you, by the way. Let me ask you a last question before we turn to the audience so we can make this interactive. Tonight, we're going to celebrate teachers with the launch of the Global Teacher Prize. And in your curriculum, there's a lot of emphasis on self-learning and peer learning. What is the place of a teacher then in an IB system?
Yeah, we work with the teachers. I mean, they're our focal point in the schools. Because the IB actually doesn't run schools, we don't teach. So we depend quite heavily on that teacher being the, not just the agent of instruction, because that's how a teacher's role is typically seen, is that they're the deliverer of curriculum, but we want them to be in charge of the teaching that is happening in the classrooms. And this word that is often used in educational literature or educational conferences, teacher as facilitator, that was the basic tenet of the IB when it started about 48 years ago. A lot of our assessments as well, we place a great deal of emphasis on the teacher to deliver those formative, what I call formative education assessments. For those of you not in education, that just means you're taking a timestamp on the teacher's, on the student's assessment, so that you can guide that student towards the ultimate goalpost here. So I think for that too, we depend a lot on teachers. But the other aspect that we depend on teachers, just scaling out of the classroom itself and zooming out of the classroom and looking at it from a more global perspective, we work with the teachers in designing our curricula. So this is not some sort of handed down curriculum like, because I come from higher education. I don't know how many of you are in higher education, but we spend a heck of a lot of time writing papers and playing with semantics. So there's none of that semantic gymnastics in the curricula because it's designed by teachers for teachers to be implemented in the classroom as well.
Siva, thank you. I'd like to give an opportunity to any one of you who has a question, comments, and she will pass around the microphone. Anybody? There you go.
Thank you very much. Do you see or advocate a change to curriculum, particularly with an IB focus, moving away from traditional subjects in the future, further away, to try and empower our young people to become 21st century skill-based global citizens? Do you see that as where we should be moving? And the reason I ask that question is because I am vice principal at Jumeirah College, which is a very traditional British curriculum-focused school, and we're constantly juggling the balance between keeping that traditional educational focus alongside trying to empower our students to become 21st century students of the future, as it were.
Mm-hmm. When you say traditional subjects, could you qualify what that means?
Well, we're obviously following a British curriculum of GCSEs and A-levels from quite a narrow focus.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would be thinking of when we're looking at 21st century skills, not necessarily focusing significantly on those, but more towards a sort of traditional curriculum that's been in existence for a long time.
So I think one of the things that attracted me to the IB when I was on the university side was its broad liberal arts base. So you can't get a diploma in the IB unless you are attempting a holistic set of subjects. I mean, it's a demand. It's a qualification that requires that. So we asked the student to take, mathematics, English or languages. We're very, those of you who know the IB know that we place an emphasis on language acquisition right from the primary years all the way through diploma. And I think I want to emphasize that because that's very dear to me about the IB. And language acquisition is not about, I learn a few sentences of French so I could order coffee when I go there to Paris. But it is about a deep appreciation for the language and the culture associated with that language. It is also used to ground you in your respect for others, because I think unless you understand several languages, and some of us had the benefit of growing up with several languages, you really don't really truly understand the other person. So I think that's an expectation as well. So to come back to your question, I think we will keep this model of an emphasis on humanities, mathematics, the traditional languages, and sciences. And I think for those of you who don't know the IB, what we expect the student to do is to test themselves to their personal best, right? So if they have a natural proclivity to for mathematics, we want them to go all the way in the mathematics area. So we have 4 courses in mathematics. The top one is very, very hard. Even university, professors say this is very, very hard. So we want them to go that full spectrum. So push yourself to your personal best in whatever subject you don't have a natural affinity for or proclivity for, but also test yourself in other subjects. Don't let it go. So if you don't have a natural affinity for mathematics, then at least take the basic courses, because we want those numeracies. And this morning, Andreas talked about how important that baseline measurement is for the student, regardless. So we take a broad approach like that. Within that, we have a number of subjects where we ask schools to design courses. So we have a lot of innovative courses that come to us from schools. So one, for instance, recently we've adopted is global politics. So, and then design technology. All of these are going to become new and different ways of thinking, so computing is going to be very different in the future. So we hope to keep innovating in the courses. That way we're allowing the schools to pick what is important for them and their students and the particular setting they're in.
Anybody else?
Hi, I'm a head of a school that's a candidate school for all 3 programs, and worked in a 3 IB school previous to starting this school, a GEM school in Switzerland. We had our IB diploma visit last week, and I'm just wanting to help you to answer the question there in the sense that there are a lot of schools in Switzerland that do what I call patchwork education. They do the IGCSEs and then they switch to the diploma, because that's what parents want to see. Because they want to see the rigorousness of the IGCSEs and the assessment portion, but they don't. And then they also want to have the diploma tick box. I've got an IB diploma, so I can go to any university in the world. I think it's important to mention that the IB is going the e-assessment route, which is going to make it much more rigorous in terms of comparing to the IGCSEs. So to answer your question on that one.
Yeah, if I might linger there for a moment. First of all, thank you for helping me out. So we have several different programs which I haven't focused on, but in the middle years, that is the pre-11th and 12th grade kind of, we are experimenting with, because remember in the diploma we can't mess with too much, because they're going to the university, so you want to be very careful about how you play there, because after all the universities have to accept things. And those of you who come from universities know that they change very slowly. So we focus in the MY, which is called the Middle Years Program. We are focusing on some very innovative assessments called the e-assessment, but we're focusing on concepts, which I think are going to become more and more important in the future of the world, because that concrete knowledge, that calculus, all of those, that stepwise learning is going away. And those of you who are adults working in your profession know that, if you're not in teaching, that you constantly have to think and bring things together to be knowledgeable and to succeed in your careers. So one of the things we're focusing on is this concept-based testing, where we give the student real-world inputs. So we might ask a question about recycling. Why is that important in the world? And we will give them prompts, which are so a BBC report on recycling, a barge in New York carrying garbage, something like that, so that they're not constructing knowledge from what they learned before, but they're having to respond to prompts which are real-world prompts and construct knowledge on the fly. Which means you have to really think differently, and each assessment, each answer is going to be quite different for the student. But we feel increasingly in this world of information flood, what we need the student to do in effect is actually to memorize less and become a construction machine of new knowledge. And not just a person who can construct knowledge on the fly, because you have to really understand where you're taking this knowledge from and why you're picking that particular piece of knowledge from your memory, or why did you pick that particular piece of, why did you emphasize that particular sentence that reporter did, but also in creating it and manipulating it, putting the bits and bytes together in a new way so that you are able to construct that knowledge for a consumer. And that consumer could be your peer. at the schooling level. It could be your teacher, it could be the IB that uses it for assessment. And in the future, that will be the same thing, right? You'll have peers that you have to speak to and justify why you come up with the conclusions that you have. You will have somebody who assesses you, whether it's a boss or a committee or whatever. So I think we're trying to figure this out at the middle years program level. And we're looking forward to see how the traditional bodies react to this. They won't react well initially, and they have not. In accrediting us, but eventually I think you have to keep pushing that dialogue, because I think it is very, very important for students to learn this way.
Let me just check in with our timekeeper. How are we doing on time?
We're waiting. Lunch is just about to be served as well, and we'll keep going. So we've still got, I don't know what's the time over there now. Take another quick question from here.
Okay, good. So we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
My question to you is that, at a time when we are talking about greater mobility and cross-cultural, cross-border access, and we are also talking about access and equity in education, the general perception of the MYP and PYP is that they are progression, and those progressions then take you to that formal assessment, and that is the IBDP. So when you're talking about equity and access and mobility in education, and then you limit the child at a time of globalization and cross-border opportunities, so the child essentially can only go to an IB school if the child is in the middle of MYP and he or she, they move to, let's say, Dubai or Qatar or South Africa. So how do you deal with that challenge where IBDP is the assessment that gets you formally into the university, whereas the PYP and MYP are more progressive? And secondly, I wanted to ask you that universities in higher education in the world, minus a few Ivy Leagues and a few University of London and Russell Group, they're not responding very well to the critical thinking, to that pedagogical shift that you've talked about. They're still focusing admissions on the basis of achievement, grades, and excellence. And part of it is drawn by their own SATs or university examinations. So in absence of higher education accepting that pedagogical shift, so how do you see the shift in the future? Thank you.
Okay, let me give you what might seem like a superficial answer to your first question, because it'll take up quite a lot of time. I would hope that there are enough IB schools around the world that the child can transfer, because it will be quite a gear shift for that student to move from MYP to, say, like an IGCSE, which is based on content. Not that they won't survive, it'll just be a gear shift. Coming to what universities accept, we get feedback from universities all the time that they really value a diploma student. I mean, and we're bringing, next month in Geneva, we're bringing 20 university presidents together to start this exact dialogue. But remember that the IB was designed, the diploma was designed for acceptance. I mean, that was the reason for its existence, to design a university qualification that is accepted worldwide, and that was 48 years ago. So, there is nothing that the university should feel shortchanged about when they get an IB student. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I myself was a big champion of IB students in my university, because I think the other part that I didn't mention is we have something called the core, which requires the student to do an extended essay, a 4,000-piece extended essay in which they research with quite some rigor. That's a soft landing for the university. I like to think of as a ramp up, actually, for the student once they enter university, because the mechanics of how you produce knowledge is already taken care of, so they can just participate. The second thing that I know we admired about students when they were at my university is that they are real challenging in the classroom. So it's a pleasure for those professors who are looking for that interaction to have that from diploma students. So I don't know that the universities are adverse to the IB student. In fact, they welcome them. We have studies to show that the IB students do very well in very challenging universities. If anything, it sets them up for success, and I think universities are aware. Now, where we get into into issues are, because we're working around the world, is some universities want like an entrance exam or want TOEFL and those kind of requirements that they have for everyone, which is challenging for us to accept, because here we are producing a student that's very worthy and they're having to do what the university requires broadly.
Anyone else?
Okay, we've got about 20 minutes left of questions, so while lunch is coming out, continue to ask questions.
If I could just ask another question. I think the benefits of an IB system are pretty obvious. I was wondering if there's anything, as you seek to innovate and continue to grow, that you wish to do better.
I think one of the, I used to be a chief operating officer before I became the director general. So one of the questions that is always asked of me is like, what about the costs, right? So how can you make it less costly? I don't know that the answer is making it less costly, but it is making it more accessible. Making the knowledge that is produced in the IB more accessible. So I think one of the things that we are excited about, and I don't know where Maisa is sitting, but she, oh, there she is, okay, is in our strategy, what we hope to do is, because we have the benefit of having a great many wonderful schools around the world, is to be able to capture that knowledge and that good teaching and kind of distribute it to the rest of the world. So create a place which at the moment we're calling it Project Agora, to collect all of the knowledge about best IB teaching. And it's our, give it back to the rest of the world, because as an organization, we believe in education for a better world. And we clearly know that with the 5,000 programs we have, we can create a better world in pockets, but we can't create a large-scale better world.
And since you touched on it, I wasn't going to go there. How much does it cost for one student to go through an IB program for 1 year?
Okay. I can't really answer that question, not because I don't want to, but because it varies around the world. So in schools in the US, where we're in public schools, those funds are supported by the government. And so they use the public school funding to support that student. In private schools, the private schools have to pay, I think it roughly runs $10,000 for a program, an annual fee for us. And that allows us as a not-for-profit to continue to innovate, because we have no other source of funding. We get the funding from our schools. So we use that money to circulate back and give it back, give great curriculum back to the schools.
How much would you say the most expensive IB school costs and the least expensive?
That's a very, very broad range, and some might make you roll your eyes. But for us, we don't care. I mean, so I don't know what the GEM school charges, for its tuition, and we don't peg our fees based on what the school is charging, because the school could be doing a heck of a lot of things, right? It could be having a great library. It could be, we work with private, we work for not-for-profit schools. They could be doing a number of things that is causing their fee to be higher. We charge the same fee for all schools. So it doesn't matter whether the school is charging zero, as in most of our schools that are supported by state systems, or is charging 26,000. We're agnostic. We only have one fee, because in some schools that is less than half of what one student pays, and in some schools it's supported by states.
Are there any students that are not suitable for the IB curriculum, or you accept all students?
Yeah, this is a fundamental belief. There's no such thing that a student is not, ready for an IB curriculum. They might not achieve the same score as a more academically able student or a more driven student, because I don't think it's also about like you're somehow genetically engineered to it's effort, it is discipline, maybe a tiny bit of lack of life in high school, but it's about focusing and trying to achieve. And not all students are going to get 45. In fact, I write a letter to all of the students who get 45s in our IB world out of the 135,000 students, 135,000 students. So it's not a lot of them, But what we want is all students to shoot for this discipline, because it's a discipline about how you time yourself, how you prioritize, how you try to get a life, as well as be educated, how you set your goals, what courses you choose. These are all good things. You know, if you got that covered at the pre-university level, you're set for life.
Okay, I have another question over the back here, if that's okay, ladies.
Hi, I work in the early years, and sometimes myself and my team, we find like we're trying to make things fit. Are there any plans to make more of an early years program, so a program that's tailored and more guidance for the early years?
When you say early years, you mean before the PYP? Or?
3 to 5.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time talking about this at the strategy level. I think one of the things we're going to do is to allow a lot more flexibility. So for that 3 to 5 age group, we could not prioritize that among all of the priorities that the IB has to do that at this point in time, to actually think a lot of that area. Although we realize how important, I mean, those of us in education know that's a very, very important span of time.
That's where you really should be putting a lot of thinking into it?
Yeah. We are doing a lot of research right now on the primary year program is going through a review. Our programs go through whole review at moments in time so that we can think through what's working. So we're gathering a lot of feedback. We're in that phase where we're gathering a lot of feedback about what we need to do at that level, as well as the other years in the primary year program. So I'm sure it'll come out of it, because it's such an area of emphasis in the world of education today.
Did you have a question here?
You don't mind a question from me, do you? One of the things that I hear sometimes in discussions around education and culture and the international character of the IB curriculum is the concern around how you balance that focus with a local culture. What's your view on that, particularly for regions and countries like this that are quite concerned about, for example, the loss of language and culture?
Yeah. I think the IB is particularly designed for that, because remember, when it was designed 48 years ago, those children were being displaced because we were designed mostly for diplomats' children. It was designed to ensure that that culture is preserved, because a student would migrate around the world with their parents and then come back to either their home country or to a university somewhere. I think the emphasis on appreciating your own culture first is very, very much a tenet of the IB, because if you don't appreciate your own culture, how can you appreciate someone else's culture? So in the program, there's a lot of flexibility for schools to pick the emphasis on what they want to place. Give you an example of, while we do a dual language diploma in 3 languages at the moment, we do it in Spanish, French, so students can actually do those subjects in those European languages. But most recently, we're working with the Japanese science and technology part of the ministry has determined that they want IB in place for their school. So we're working with them, because they've made a commitment as a country. We're working with them to design a dual language diploma in Japanese. And there will be a lot of emphasis on Japanese culture, but that's this very basic belief of the IB that you have to respect your own culture. And I might say, I think, because your interest was also in global citizen, that becomes more and more important, because students need an anchor as they migrate through the world. I can say for myself, that's what anchors me, because I'm traveling at least, in one country every week, so a different country every week. You have to have that grounding and that anchor as an individual of and think a lot about what you value, what is your value system, so that, with all of the flood of information that comes, flood of influences that come in your life, you're not being swayed by everything. There's a basic core by which you are able to evaluate both information and world influences that might influence you from time to time, and those influences are different in the lifespan of an individual.
One of the things that you believe in at IB is you don't shy away from controversy. So you allow students to explore a range of questions, even the difficult questions. What are some of the more difficult questions that students have had to grapple with?
I wouldn't be very good at answering this question because I've actually never taught in a
Right.
K-12 classroom. But I would ask some of my colleagues from the IB schools to answer if they could. But I think that is, we expect the students to ask difficult questions. When we moved into cultures where young students in our primary years programs are not allowed to talk at home, because it's like the adults know better, and those students start asking questions. The parents always comment about how it takes a certain period of acceptance to ask those questions. I think I'm not a big tweeter, but the only time I tweet is when I find really good stuff that the school's students have done. That they've taken a matter that has deeply affected them, and they go out and create projects and things like that to change the world around them. So I don't know if my colleagues in the IB have a good answer for that question there.
Please.
When you work in an international school or in any school these days, there's usually differences in culture, differences in tradition, differences in religion, differences in everything. So previously, for the diploma program in particular, because that's the kind of higher level discussions that you would have, the things that come up in what we would call the playground are literally the Israeli-Palestinian, any kind of conflict is brought up in the school setting, and the students have to look at it from different perspectives. So we make kids look at it from all the different angles. One of the examples, even in primary school, that I saw in a previous school that I was working at, was children who were talking about development and about pollution and about how it's really terrible. This one village in China is completely covered in soot. And I said to them, yeah, but before they were covered in soot, what happened was those parents didn't have jobs at all. And what consequences are those for the kids? Basically, their parents had no income, etc. So we always push the IB students to think of the different perspectives. It's called basically perspectives in education. So when something has not been brought up, it is the teacher's job to bring it up, to challenge, to make them think outside of the box. So anything and everything can come up, from sexual identity to politics, wars, religions, traditions, anything comes up in IB schools. So it can be tricky to teach that sometimes.
And how do you bring that to life in a classroom? Are you role-playing or?
Yeah, somewhat. You have to say, well, okay, let's put yourself in this situation with a particular, as I say, the example of a village that's covered in soot, and we're saying how terrible they're polluted. Well, the other perspective is, they're actually happy to have jobs and to have work. So there's you have to just kind of force those kids to think outside of the box about every angle to every aspect of the curriculum.
And how do you prepare teachers to engage in that kind of conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Because
you ask
they
teachers
also
to
have
prepare.
opinions of their own.
Of course you have your opinion. You have your personal opinion. And as much as you have to keep your personal opinion out of the equation when you're trying to give kids as many perspectives as possible. And that's a tricky one.
Is there any special training then for IB teachers?
Yeah.
That is apart from?
I mean, it's differentiation, but it's just making them think of those different perspectives. Once you get on that track, you only think that way. You just always think, well, why is this person upset? What are they sad about in whatever situation? It could be in just a playground situation. Could you see it from their point of view? Because there's always two sides, as they say, traditionally it takes two to tango.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Could you tell us your name?
Audrey Peverelli.
Thank you, Audrey.
So I think what Audrey was referencing is a course we have in the core. As I mentioned, we have three aspects in our core. And one of the courses we have is the theory of knowledge, where this came to us because as I said, when the IB was created, it was created with a lot of philosophies. And this is a contribution by the French teachers at the time who wouldn't let go until we had this course. And it is about how do you understand perspective? How do you understand knowledge? How is knowledge created, and what is knowledge? And I think what Audrey was talking to is that theory of knowledge course. The teacher has to be prepared to let go, and to be able to deal with whatever the topic of the day is. I mean, I know when the Charlie Hebdo incident happened, for instance, there was a lot of conversation in the IB world about that, not to mention we don't need to mention the many incidents in the world that would provoke conversation. So I think what is important is, how do you understand that perspective? Because sometimes it's a written perspective that the student could research, but sometimes you also have to be prepared to understand perspectives that might not have the written word, because not all narrative is documented in books. Different cultures work different ways. So they have to really think through how is knowledge, and knowledge is different. So how is knowledge created in biology? How is knowledge created in humanities and all of that? So.
And this all sounds like very serious stuff. And I think also research has shown us that how important it is for students, or children particularly, to have time to play. Do you take things easy at all?
So I think we want, first of all, I've never spoken over lunch. It seems like I feel like I'm disrupting the lunch rather than. So the interesting thing is, as we speak on the clang of tables, plates here, is I think we want the student to be balanced. So we have, the CAS course, which is creativity, action, and service, requires the student to have some physical activity and physical outlets as well. So they are, but play is different, isn't it? So for different people.
Okay, I think we've got time for about one or two more questions before we wrap up, and should be on dessert and coffee. So does anyone else have any questions from the floor here? Work my way through the trays. I can probably say it. Here we are, nearly there. Thank you. I'm going to lose my train of thought.
Hi, I'm new to the IB. This is my first year, but I've been teaching for quite a while. And I was particularly drawn to the IB because of the whole idea of creating a global citizen. A lot of times in school philosophies and mission statements, it's in there, but it's kind of like, well, what's behind it?
Yeah.
And so I've been, in my very limited experience with the IB, really wondering how much of a critical lens do you encourage educators to take when they approach curriculum? Because a lot of times when we're teaching in schools, we're really reinforcing a master narrative that helps certain people retain privilege and power. And so I think one of the things that I hope that I can grow in as an IB educator is sort of dismantle that and deconstruct curriculum to be able to get kids to think about that, particularly because I think that more than anything has to do with becoming a global citizen. So yeah. I'm just wondering, just if you could talk to that a little bit more, just because I want to know more about how that sort of might be used in IB.
Yeah. So those two words juxtaposed together actually make no sense, because there is no such thing as a global citizen. You can't get a passport to the world. You belong to some country. So I think the intention there is to we use the word internationally minded, and that is then you are engaging with the world in a different way, and you're using your knowledge to understand the world in a different way. And we want that to happen regardless of what you do. So you may never leave Brazil, right? But we want you to develop that thinking. You may never leave, we have a lot of schools in Mexico. You may never leave schools in Mexico, or you may never leave Mexico, but we want you to understand the world. And I think that is more important today than it is. So coming to the teachers, I think, we spend a lot of time on professional development. We expect that teacher to be, whether it's professional development with us or professional development in general, that teacher needs to be continuous. So far, we were lucky enough to actually mix that professional development up so that, the teacher teaching first of all, we, the IB, don't teach at all. We always work with our teachers. So we influence that by bringing teachers from different parts of the world together. That is going to become increasingly difficult. Well, it is already difficult because it involves, plane travel, hotel, and so it's only available to a few. So we moved to the online space in that area. But even within that, we want to construct that dialogue And you mentioned, the influence of curriculum, and we'll go into education, speak a little bit here, but, those of us in education know there is a curriculum that is mandated, and then there's a curriculum that is taught in the classroom, on which the teacher has complete power, actually. So I think what we try to do is to influence that curriculum when we create it, or frameworks when we create it, to say you must design it. And if you're becoming an IB school, we spend time evaluating what you produced to see if this is happening. Do we have evidence that this is happening? To ensure that those world perspectives are built in. I think this is, I think this is a good idea. Anyone would agree this is a good idea. I mean, if you're an employer, this is a good idea. If you're you're from a university, this is a good idea. If you're a parent, I hope also you would agree that this is a good idea, because the more that student is able to think broadly, the better. And I want to pause on the citizen bits, I think, because we spend a lot of time talking about this. I know there was a whole conference where we did a session just on this, and I was one of the speakers there. We want the student to engage locally, because all of us can become desktop activists and not actually participate, right? And I think what you need to be able to do is to have a point of view in the world and to influence change, because change is hard. And we want that student to have that perspective and make some change in the world where they are, because you can abdicate that responsibility locally and say you've taken care of the world, but you haven't done anything locally. So I think both those tenets are important. Which is why the IB has to be mindful of that. So to fit everywhere, it has to be mindful about what matters to Texans, for instance, or what matters to Ecuadorians and what matters to Japanese. That should be important, as well as your contributions to the world, and therefore your role in the world and locally as well, I think.
Siva, you've said that there's no such thing as global citizenship, but I'm going to have to part ways with you on that.
Yeah.
I think that there is such a thing as global citizenship, and this is not defined by the passport that we hold, because this is just a document. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me, there are some ideas that we should not empower. There's ideas of country borders that change depending on circumstances and wars and which government is in power. When we talk about global citizenship, we're talking about our common humanity. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't matter where you are. Before 1884, for example, in Africa, I'm from Africa, there was no Zimbabwe versus South Africa and whatnot. So I am not attached to the idea of me being a Zimbabwean, because I feel that all of these things are just ways to control us. And we must rise above that and understand that no matter where you are from, no matter where I am from or anybody else, we want the same things. We want to have love in our lives. We want our families to succeed. We want good health and all of these things. And I think that this is what we're talking about, this recognition that I am a part of the larger world. Mm-hmm. I'm not separated by these artificial borders that I think people who live in taxes on us and whatnot benefit from. I don't... But the activist in me is coming out now.
That's okay. Let's not part ways yet. So I think those, the descriptors that you used, we believe in, right? So we believe in shared humanity. And we believe that in some values that I think everybody would agree is a good thing, like caring about the world, wondering about circumstances of different people in the world, well, whatever passport they carry, is important. I think we phrase that as international mindedness, rather than some descriptors which are coming into play, which is about skills you develop to succeed in someplace else, as opposed to thinking you develop to think very broadly about shared humanity, which is very different, because one is that I'm going to acquire these skills so that I can go succeed in China, because that's the greatest economy right now. Oh, well, that was a blunder. It's an emerging economy right now, so I think my success will be based on whether, which economy is doing well, as opposed to I'm going to become a broad contributor to this world, both in where I belong at the moment by virtue of passport or parentage or whatever. As we all know, there's a huge number of students in this world who actually don't belong anywhere because they've been migrating. And then I will contribute to the rest of the world too. But okay, be the activist.
Okay, ladies, you have 5 minutes left now till the end of our lunchtime session here. So I don't know if you'd like to sort of sum up for our delegates here. Thank you.
Siva, thank you so much it's been a wonderful experience, just learning more about IB, which I wasn't really aware of, and this time to talk to you, and someone who shares the same perspective on education being a force for greater good. And I remember when we started talking about global citizenship back at the UN, we were attacked mercilessly. But now we're actually at a point where people want us to clarify what we mean, and we feel that this is progress. And we will continue to challenge ourselves and move forward. But I thank you for your time. And perhaps if you have any parting words as well, that'd be great.
Oh, sure. Thank you for yours as well, and for the challenging conversation. We should have a glass of wine. I'll take a picture.
And this is water, by the way.
So you say. So I think it's important. I mean, just that clarification about global citizen. I think. I've been in education in the space for a long time, and I don't want to. Sometimes educational terms come and go. It's the phrase of the past 3 years is this global skills, global citizenship. I want our underlying tenets to remain the same. I was having this conversation with Andreas last October, and he uses global citizen, and I said, well, we don't, the IB will stick to international mindedness. And actually that might be an out of date term as well, but it's the idea of being concerned about a lot more than your little part of the world. And being concerned about it in a way that is important and in a manner that is rigorous in your thinking. Like, why do you come to the assumptions that you do? And then I want to thank all of particularly, for the support I've gotten here. So thanks for coming.
Thank you all for coming.